A small rocky island sits in the sea passage between Crete and the Peloponnese. Around it, the water opens and narrows again, part of a route long used by ships moving through the Mediterranean. The coastline there is spare and stony. Sea and stone meet in simple lines, and the air, one imagines, would have carried salt, brightness, and the ordinary motion of travel from one harbor to another. Among the many things once carried over that water, there was also a small instrument of bronze, compact enough to fit inside a box, quiet in its scale, made to be held near rather than seen from far away. What remains of it now is not a whole object. It survives in pieces, several larger fragments and many smaller ones, each with broken edges and surfaces altered by a very long stay beneath the sea. The name given to it gathers those pieces together, but the eye meets fragments first. Green-brown bronze, marine crust, irregular outlines, a few partial circles. Here and there, beneath corrosion and mineral deposit, the hint of small gears. The island gives the object its modern name, yet the object belongs to a much older world. It is usually placed in the late 2nd or early 1st century before the Common Era in the Hellenistic-Mediterranean. That was a world in which Greek astronomy and mathematics were not far from craft. Calculation could take material form. Skilled metalworkers cut, fitted, and assembled parts with care. Ideas moved in texts and teaching, but also in instruments, in measured surfaces, in shaped bronze. Ships carried goods between ports, and with the goods went habits of making and habits of thought, both crossing the sea in ordinary ways. So the mechanism sits naturally enough in that broader setting, not alone, not outside its age, but within a world where learned attention and practical workmanship could meet. Astronomy in such a setting was not only a matter of looking upward, it could also be a matter of circles marked on a surface, of motion guided through small gears, of recurring times brought into relation by hand and eye. Mathematics did not remain only in diagrams. Metalworking did not remain only decorative. The sea route near Antikythera joined places where such knowledge and such craft could travel together. Still, all of that comes later and softly. At first there are only the remains, corroded bronze resting in stillness. The fragments are heavily mineralized after roughly 2,000 years underwater. Sea deposits cling to them and in places seem almost to have become part of them. Metal and marine accretion lie together in compact masses, so that what was once clear in shape is now difficult to separate with a glance. A wheel may appear first as a rough curve. A plate may seem like stone until light catches a flatter plane. The object has passed through so much time that its surfaces now speak more readily of endurance than of use. And yet use is there in outline. The surviving pieces suggest a small box-like instrument, something contained and orderly, not monumental, not public in scale. The wooden casing that once held it is mostly gone, but traces remained. Impressions, edges, and the way some parts seem to have been enclosed helped later observers estimate a compact wooden case with front and back faces. The lost wood is part of the shape even now, because without it the fragments can seem more scattered than they once were. The traces of enclosure gather them back into a single modest form. That nearness matters because the remains are full of smallness. Small breaks, small cavities, small arcs, and within the corroded mass, small gears not immediately obvious, only partly visible, emerging little by little from the roughened surface. Their presence is one of the quiet surprises of the fragments, though even surprise is too sharp a word for something learned so gradually. Better to say that order begins to show through the corrosion. Tooth after tooth, regular in spacing, appears where at first there seemed only an uneven edge. A partial circle becomes more clearly mechanical. Bronze that looked merely worn begins to suggest intention. Inside that compact form were gear wheels with carefully cut teeth. The teeth are among the clearest signs that this was an instrument made with precision. Their spacing is regular. Their edges, where preserved, show intention rather than ornament. These are working surfaces meant to meet and answer one another. One tooth passes another and motion continues. One wheel turns and another responds. Even in broken condition, the small gears still suggest this calm sequence of contact and transfer. The gear wheels belong to a structure of axles and plates. Thin bronze plates helped define layers and boundaries. Axles held wheels in place. Openings and pivots allowed motion to pass through the instrument. The fragments preserve only part of this arrangement, but enough remains to show that the interior was not random or crowded by accident. It was organized. Plate thickness can be measured. Distances between elements can be compared. A surviving join between two pieces can settle one small question of placement. Patient reconstruction often begins with such modest physical facts. There were also pointers and scales. These belong to the visible faces of the instrument, where motion inside became readable outside. A pointer crossing a marked surface is a simple thing to imagine. Hidden gears do their work within. On the front and back, a pointer advances over divisions and signs. The instrument is ancient and tied to astronomical calculation, yet at the level of materials it remains a collection of clear relations. Wheel to wheel, axle through plate, pointer over scale, hand to handle. That hand likely turned a small external knob or handle. The surviving fragments do not preserve every part equally, and some details remain inferred rather than fully present, but hand-operated motion is the most natural reading of the evidence. A knob or handle on the outside of the case would have set the gear train in motion. It is an unhurried image, a small turn, resistance from the linked wheels. Then the quiet answering movement within, carried through bronze teeth cut with care long ago. The marked surfaces on front and back were accompanied by writing, and the writing is one of the most intimate features of the object. Close-set Greek letters run across some fragments in small, dense lines. They are not large inscriptions for a wall or monument. They were meant for close reading. The eye would have come near. The instrument would have been held or placed at a comfortable distance for someone to inspect the text, follow a label, or consult an operating note. In this way, the lettering confirms what the compact case already suggests. This was a near object, not a distant one. The Greek text seems practical in character. Partly labels, partly guidance, it helps connect the visible parts to their intended use. Yet even before the words are fully understood, their presence changes the feel of the mechanism. It becomes not only a set of small gears but a reading instrument as well. Bronze and writing share the same limited space. Thin bronze plates carry not only structure but meaning. The close-set letters rest on darkened metal, faint in places, interrupted by corrosion but still arranged with purpose. A steady turn, then a pause to read, and then another steady turn. The object is easiest to imagine in that rhythm, not as a display fixed in place, but as a small boxed instrument held near at hand, brought close to the eyes, worked by fingers that knew how little pressure was needed. A little movement at the side, and pointers would begin their slow travel over marked scales. The motion need not be imagined as quick. It is better understood as deliberate, almost patient in itself, as if the instrument preferred to move at the pace of reading. On the front face, the visible order seems to have gathered several cycles together. The sun, the moon, the band of the zodiac, and the Egyptian calendar were likely brought into relation there. A pointer crossing a scale could make time visible not as a single line, but as a set of returning paths. The circles and arcs on the surface would have offered a way to follow recurrence by sight. A hand turns the outer control. Inside, small gears pass the motion along. Outside, a pointer shifts by a narrow amount, and a different place on a ring or scale comes into view. The moon seems to have had a special place in this arrangement. Reconstructions often suggest a display that represented its changing and uneven motion. That unevenness was important to Greek astronomy, where geometry tried to give form to what careful observation had long noticed. Here, in bronze, the same concern may have taken material shape. A small gear does not know the moon. It only turns as it is made to turn. Yet through arrangement and proportion, one wheel answering another, the instrument could model a cycle that was not perfectly uniform. The thought is gentle rather than dramatic, irregularity translated into regular teeth, variation carried by precise metal. The back of the mechanism extended that habit of relation into longer spans. One spiral dial likely followed the metonic cycle, the 19-year pattern by which lunar months and solar years can be brought into workable correspondence. Another back dial likely followed the Saros cycle, long used to anticipate the broad recurrence of eclipses. Not exact modern forecasts for one place, but a cyclical understanding that certain alignments return after a known interval. Some reconstructions also include a 4-year cycle associated with major Greek games, suggesting that civic time may have stood beside celestial time in the same small box. All of this belongs comfortably within the Hellenistic world that surrounded the object. In that older Mediterranean, educated buyers and users could value more than ornament alone. A device that held calendars in relation, that gave visible order to recurring cycles, would have suited a world accustomed to reckoning time in several ways at once. Different measures of time did not cancel one another. They sat together on the same instrument, brought into order by turning. The workmanship suggests that such knowledge was not only abstract. Greek astronomy and mathematics in this period could be expressed through craft. Fine metalworking and learned calculation were not enemies. They met in axle holes, gear teeth, engraved scales, and compact inscriptions. The regular spacing of the teeth still speaks softly of deliberate practice. Someone knew how to cut bronze so that one wheel would answer another. Someone expected motion to pass steadily through the device when a handle was turned. Someone wrote close-set words as labels or operating notes, trusting that the user would read at short distance, as one reads a useful object held near the body. This does not require imagining the mechanism as alone in its age. It is unusual in what survives, but survival is not the same as uniqueness. Ancient literary references, including passages in Cicero, help place it within a broader tradition of devices associated with astronomical display. Such references do not identify this instrument directly, and they do not remove uncertainty. Still, they help keep it within a larger habit of making, only sparsely preserved now, in which instrument making, geometry, and sky watching could belong together. Before it became a group of fragments on lit surfaces, it moved through a sea passage. Near the island of Antikythera, ships crossed a familiar stretch of water linking the Aegean to wider Mediterranean routes. Workshops, ports, merchants, and buyers were connected by these passages. Crafted objects traveled with other crafted objects. Texts and habits of calculation traveled with them too. The Hellenistic world was full of such quiet connections, made by repeated crossings. So the mechanism may be placed gently in the enclosed dark of a cargo hold, not alone and not set apart from other work of skilled hands. The wreck from which its remains were later recovered also held statues, pottery, and glassware. Bronze stood near stone, ceramic, and glass. Packed cargo rested close to packed cargo. A large merchant vessel probably carried these things through the eastern Mediterranean, its hold arranged for transport rather than display. In that space, the small box-like instrument would have been one object among many, one carefully made thing among other carefully made things. A cargo hold is not a place of explanation. It is a place of nearness, weight, and arrangement. Objects are wrapped, braced, stacked, or nested. Surfaces touch in darkness. Wood meets rope, pottery meets padding, bronze rests in stillness until the next unloading. The mechanism belongs easily in such a setting because it was itself a compact arrangement of parts, plates, axles, pointers, and small gears held within a case. Even before anyone asks what it displayed, it can be understood as something made to be transported, handled, and kept among valued goods. Then there is a long interruption. First there was an active instrument, housed in wood, arranged with small gears, pointers, scales, and inscribed surfaces. Then there was a submerged object resting in darkness for roughly 2 millennia. During that long interval, the sea did not preserve it evenly. It settled on it, it altered the surfaces. It left marine deposits fused to metal, so that bronze and seabed came to rest together in a single rough mass. Corroded bronze has a quiet way of holding time. Its color is no longer the color of newly worked metal. It has become green-brown, dark in places, pale in others, with a stony crust over shapes that were once crisp. Edges that may once have been straight are softened. Openings are partly filled. Fine details retreat beneath mineral layers. Time seems not to have moved past it, but to have settled into it. The mechanism did not remain visible to itself as a mechanism. Small gears did not wait underwater as a neat set of wheels ready to be lifted free. Many survived only as partial forms, embedded within corroded masses, their outlines interrupted by crust and fracture. A circle might persist only in part. A line of teeth might appear, then disappear again into stone-like corrosion. A plate might survive as a layer pressed close against another layer, with only the faintest separation between them. The old order of the instrument was not erased, but it was folded inward. Some materials endured better than others. The wooden case that once held the device in a box-like housing mostly vanished, yet even there not everything was lost without a trace. Impressions, stains, and slight material signs helped later observers infer that the bronze had once been enclosed, so the case is known gently, by absence as much as by survival. The wood is largely gone, but traces of a lost wooden case remain at the edges of understanding, enough to suggest shape without restoring every surface. Bronze endured differently. It did not remain unchanged, but it remained. Within the altered metal, durable patterns persisted. Gear teeth kept their spacing, plate layers held their thickness, axle positions could still be inferred, dial markings survived in part, portions of Greek inscriptions remained faintly present on darkened surfaces. These were not complete messages offered plainly to the eye. They were traces, often small and close set, requiring careful looking. After that long submersion, there were fragments on tables, in storerooms, in museum rooms, in study spaces, in laboratories where the old metal could be examined again. The line is not continuous. It is interrupted, then resumed in another form, not use but study, not turning a handle but turning a fragment gently under light. A storeroom has its own calm. Labels, drawers, shelves, and measured spaces replace the packed closeness of a cargo hold. Here the mechanism becomes a set of pieces that can be moved a short distance at a time, from drawer to table, from table to case, from case back to storage. Corroded bronze is stable enough to be kept but not forced. Small gears may be visible in part, then disappear again into roughened surfaces. One fragment suggests a plate, another a wheel, another a line of inscription so faint that it asks for angled light. In such rooms, understanding grows not from spectacle but from arrangement, one piece beside another, one note beside a drawing, one measured thickness compared with the next. Then there is the study table, perhaps the most fitting of all these later spaces. A table accepts fragments without asking them to become complete. It offers a flat plane, a lamp, a ruler, paper, photographs, and the patient reconstruction of relations. Early work depended on direct looking. The eye followed broken edges and tooth patterns. Hands made drawings. The corroded bronze was turned slightly under light. Small gears were counted where counting was possible. Inscriptions, densely placed and meant for close reading, were traced letter by letter. The counting of teeth became one of the quiet disciplines of the table. Small gears, even when incomplete, offer regularity. Their spacing is not casual. Their teeth can be counted where enough survives or estimated where only a segment remains. Ratios begin to appear not as abstractions first, but as material relations in corroded bronze. A certain number of teeth here, a matching engagement there. The same fragment is lifted, turned, and set down again. The same row is counted once more. Repeated looking gives steadiness to the numbers. Other details gather beside the gears. Axle positions matter because a wheel must turn somewhere. Plate thickness matters because layers of mechanism require room. The distance between visible features matters because pointers and scales once had to pass one another without collision. Fragment joins matter because a break edge on one piece may continue the line of another. None of these observations is large by itself. Together they form a kind of quiet architecture. The missing whole is approached through these modest survivals. The inscriptions ask for the same patience. They are small, densely arranged Greek letters cut for close reading. On the fragments they do not stand forth clearly. They lie among corrosion, softened by age, interrupted by breaks, crossed by stains and deposits. A line may begin well and then vanish. A word may survive in part. A single letter may be read one way in one generation and a little differently in another. So the text returns to the table as often as the gears do. It is read letter by letter, then line by line over many decades. These words matter because they are not merely decoration. They seem to have served partly as labels, partly as operating notes, helping indicate what a dial or display may have represented. Yet even this understanding grows gradually. A clearer reading of one cluster of letters may support a proposed scale. A newly noticed word may fit with a pointer system already suspected from the metalwork. Gears, inscriptions, and dial markings begin to speak in relation to one another, though always softly, never all at once. Photography added another layer to the work. A photograph holds a surface still in a way the eye alone cannot quite preserve. It allows repeated comparison without constant handling. A faint line can be examined again. A damaged edge can be compared with an earlier view. Under different lighting, the same corroded bronze yields slightly different information. Shadows emphasize relief. Raking light can make an inscription more legible, or a gear tooth more distinct. Later, radiography allowed the study to move inward without forcing the metal apart. Beneath the mineralized surface, hidden layers inside compact masses began to show themselves in outline. A wheel concealed within corrosion could be distinguished from the crust around it. Separate plates could be seen where the eye had only met a single rough block. The corroded bronze remained constant, but the view of it became deeper. Then high-resolution X-ray computed tomography carried that inward view further. Dense, fused fragments could be examined as layered structures rather than as sealed lumps. Concealed gears emerged more clearly. Internal cavities, axles, and the order of overlapping parts could be traced with greater confidence. Faint lettering, difficult to read on the outer surface alone, sometimes became more legible through this kind of imaging. The work was still patient reconstruction. The scan did not end the need for judgment. It simply gave judgment more to work with. What is striking over this long span is how normal revision became. One proposed arrangement of gears is tested against tooth counts and plate thicknesses. Another arrangement fits the surviving joins better. One reading of an inscription supports a certain dial. A later reading refines it. Measured diagrams are redrawn. Reconstructions are adjusted. The mechanism is understood not by a single solution descending into place, but by one proposal yielding gently to another that accounts for the fragments more fully. So the modern history of the object is also a history of study tools. Table light, magnified view, pencil notes, hand drawings, photographs, radiographs, computed scans. Each method returns to the same broken remains and asks for a little more clarity. Each method leaves a record that can be compared with the next. The fragments remain incomplete, the work around them becomes more layered. Corroded bronze on the table is joined by folders, images, measurements, and reconstruction drawings. The afterlife of the mechanism gathers around the metal without replacing it. Museum space adds another kind of enclosure. Under glass, the fragments often appear almost reticent, as if they would prefer the drawer or the table. Their significance is not carried by size. It arrives through comparison, labels, drawings, and the patient reconstruction that stands nearby in printed form. A visitor sees green-brown bronze broken into pieces and then sees a suggested hole beside it, a box-like instrument, dials, pointers, circles, and small gears arranged with care. The case around the fragment is now modern glass rather than ancient wood, yet the object remains enclosed again, held in a frame that asks for close attention. In a museum, all this can seem very quiet. The fragments are often presented simply as they are, irregular pieces of green-brown metal, incomplete and a little dense in appearance. Without explanation, they do not announce much. They do not resemble the smooth diagrams printed beside them. They do not immediately show the paths of pointers or the relation of small gears hidden within. Their significance arrives slowly, by standing near the object and allowing the eye to adjust to roughness, to partial circles, to the modest persistence of detail. Across all these settings, the mechanism does not stop being itself. In the cargo hold, in storage, on the study table, in the museum case, and in the imaging room, it remains corroded bronze carrying traces of small gears and inscriptions. What changes is the surrounding space and the kind of looking that space permits. Packed cargo gives way to quiet rooms. Rough transport gives way to measured handling. Hidden interiors give way slowly to images that can be studied without force. And after passing through these spaces, the fragments come to rest once more on the table, where the light is steady and the work remains patient. The same corroded bronze lies there year after year, and then decade after decade, not changing quickly in itself, but changing in what can be noticed upon it. A larger fragment with a broken curve, a smaller piece with a line of teeth, a compact mass, green-brown and stony with marine deposits holding hidden layers inside mineralized metal. The object does not offer itself all at once. It has to be revisited. It has to be seen again under another lamp, at another angle, with another instrument nearby. Time passes through the same work. Because the surviving pieces are broken and displaced, reconstruction becomes a response to damage rather than a search for completeness. The work begins with what time left behind: a count of teeth on part of a wheel, a join between two broken surfaces, the angle of a plate, the distance between one axle hole and another, a few letters of Greek text emerging from corrosion. The object persists through such clues. It does not return as a whole machine stepping forward intact. It returns in measured parts. There is something quiet in that method. Marine deposits fused to metal are not treated as obstacles alone, but as part of the object's long passage. Softened edges and partial shapes are not failures of preservation to be ignored. They are the condition in which the mechanism now exists. Reconstruction does not remove the interruption, it works within it. It accepts that the instrument survives in pieces, and that pieces can still hold order. Even the small gears remain modest when seen this way. They are not a shining interior restored all at once. They are partial arcs, hidden wheels, tooth patterns emerging from rough surfaces. Their presence is often recognized through geometry and comparison before it is felt as image. One fragment answers another. One layer explains the thickness of a second. One surviving curve suggests the diameter of a wheel no longer complete. The old instrument appears slowly, not by recovering everything, but by noticing that certain relations still remain. And so time gathers on the mechanism in two ways. It gathers physically as crust, corrosion, mineralization, and the quiet heaviness of corroded bronze. And it gathers historically as a long silence between original making and later understanding. Across that silence, only traces pass through: partial shapes, faint inscriptions, embedded gears, traces of a lost wooden case. The rest has thinned away. Yet these traces are enough to keep the object present, not complete, not continuous, but present. A fragment can still hold the rhythm of gear teeth. A rough surface can still carry lettering. A broken plate can still show where another once lay beside it. Through repeated looking, the long interruption does not disappear, but it becomes readable. As the explanatory lines begin to soften, what remains easiest to hold is the object itself. Corroded bronze resting in irregular pieces, small gears still keeping their circular order beneath the roughened surface. There is no need to gather it back into a single complete machine. It does not come forward that way. It remains as several larger fragments and many smaller ones, each with its own broken edge, each with its own compact weight. The bronze has the green-brown stillness of metal long altered by salt and time. marine deposits have fused with it. Surfaces that were once sharper have become uneven, stony in places, softened in others. After so many centuries underwater, the surviving matter is no longer simply metal. It is metal joined to residue, shape joined to crust, intention joined to interruption. And yet the intention is not far away. It rests in the regularity of the small gears. Even when only part of a wheel survives, the teeth keep their spacing. One after another, they continue in a measured rhythm around the curve. Nothing about them suggests ornament for its own sake. They belong to use, to relation, to the quiet discipline of one turning part meeting another. The full turning is absent now, but its order remains. A circle of teeth is enough to suggest another circle beside it, and another beyond that, each one answering in slow sequence. Around these inner forms there was once a box-like body of wood. That outer shape is mostly gone. The case did not remain in the way the bronze remained. Still, traces and impressions have allowed a faint outline to persist, enough to imagine a small instrument enclosed and carried, something held in the hands or set down on a table. The lost wood can be felt now only as a surrounding absence, a thin boundary once keeping plates, axles, pointers, and dials in place. On some surfaces, faint Greek letters continue close to the metal. They are small, densely arranged, not meant for distant viewing. They ask for near work, for a face bent toward the bronze, for patient eyes following shallow marks across darkened ground. Many of these letters did not become clear all at once. They emerged gradually over years of repeated looking, as if the surface gave them back in a slow and careful manner. Even now they do not dominate the fragments. They remain fine, close, and subdued, part of the texture as much as part of the meaning. Elsewhere there are partial circles, arcs, and worn divisions. These were once dials with pointers moving over marked scales. Now they can be left in their quieter state as circular traces and measured lines. A center point, a ring, a set of divisions, a path worn into arrangement. The old displays do not need to be fully animated again. It is enough to notice that the fragments preserve the geometry of recurrence. Circles remain circles even in broken form. A scale remains a scale even when interrupted. The bronze still carries the habit of counting by return. The long afterlife of the object has followed this same quiet habit. It has been looked at directly, drawn by hand, photographed under different light, examined with radiographic methods, and later opened inwardly by tomography. Each form of looking has stayed close to the same material. No method replaced the fragments themselves. Each one only found another way to remain near them. One image brought out a hidden cavity. Another separated layers within a compact mass of corrosion. Another made a line of lettering easier to trace. The work did not rush ahead of the bronze. It moved beside it, returning again and again to surface, thickness, spacing, and join. Because of that, understanding has never needed to become absolute in order to become meaningful. The object can remain partial and still be eloquent in its own restrained way. The small gears, the faint Greek letters, the box-like form mostly lost, the circular traces on front and back, all of these belong comfortably within a wider Hellenistic habit of joining craftsmanship with mathematical thought and astronomical attention. But that wider world can remain in soft outline now, no more than a distant shore behind the fragments. So the eye returns to what can still be seen without strain: corroded bronze, broken edges, small gears with carefully cut teeth, faint letters close to the surface, partial circles and worn divisions. The object grows quieter as it is held this way. Explanation loosens. The fragments do not become less significant when they are allowed to rest in their material state. If anything, the long work around them becomes easier to feel here, not as a final answer, but as a long courtesy paid to damaged things. In that courtesy there is a kind of steadiness. The fragments are not hurried toward completion. They are allowed to remain fragments. The missing wood remains missing. The displaced parts remain displaced. The exact hands that made and used the instrument do not need to come sharply into view. What lasts instead is the compact presence of the surviving pieces, and within them the implied slow turning that once linked one gear to the next. The larger world remains only in softened outline. Somewhere beyond the table there is still the Hellenistic habit of relating number to sky, observation to craft, geometry to metal. There are workshops not sharply seen, calendars not fully opened, sea routes only lightly remembered. There is the broader tradition of instrument making to which this object seems to belong, even if so little of that tradition survives in the hand. None of this needs to come forward strongly. It is enough that the bronze carries a faint impression of that world, as a worn surface can carry the memory of a former edge. What remains of the old work is modest, corroded bronze, faint Greek letters, circular scales interrupted by breaks, small gears with carefully cut teeth, some clear, some still half hidden in mineralized thickness. After roughly 2 millennia underwater, incompleteness is not an accident added from outside. It is part of what the mechanism is now. The fragments are the form in which it survives. And so its meaning has come forward through repeated looking. A fragment on a table, a drawing beside it, light across a rough surface. A photograph holding one angle still, radiographic shadows suggesting an inner wheel, tomographic slices revealing separate layers where the eye once saw only a dense mass, comparison, measurement, revision, a quiet practice of returning, measuring, and looking again. In a quiet room under museum light, the fragments can seem almost reserved. Irregular pieces of ancient bronze do not insist on their importance, they rest in their own weight. Explanation gathers around them softly and then softens again. What remains after the words recede is still the same material presence. See altered surface, softened edges, partial circles, faint inscriptions, small gears. The lost wooden case does not return. The absent handle does not need to be replaced in the hand. The full instrument is not required. There is enough here in the surviving cluster, enough to suggest a box-like instrument once turned slowly, enough to place it within a world of astronomy, mathematics, and skilled metalworking, enough to show that careful making met careful reading, enough to leave room for what is still uncertain. So the bronze may rest as bronze, the inscriptions may remain faint, the gears may stay partly hidden. The wider historical scene withdraws into outline. See route, workshop, calendar, study table, each grows dimmer, while the fragments keep their place. At last there is only the small surviving cluster of bronze on a table, its surfaces darkened by the sea, its gears half hidden, its circles no longer turning and yet still gently present, with the long habit of careful looking resting around it like a quiet light.